The chamber of the Galactic Council floated between stars like a cold crown, its tiers stacked with thrones of crystal, bone, and living metal. Light from 1,000 systems bled through the void glass floor, reflecting symbols of dominion carved into every surface. Today, Earth stood alone, small, distant, and unwanted. Across the inner ring, predators posed as diplomats, their forms stitched with armor and arrogance. Voices layered over each other, translators smoothing contempt into polite tones. They debated harvest schedules, border burnings, population culls as routine policy, trading extinction statistics with the same boredom humans reserved for weather. Laughter rolled. The human envoy did not laugh. A single figure at a narrow desk, shoulders squared, eyes forward, hands still. Behind that stillness rested a record of lost colonies, silent probes, unanswered pleas. Transmission delays stretched every human word into an echo, granting the Council extra seconds to mock before replying. An elder of the Dravian Consortium announced Earth's new status with ceremonial disdain. Trade lanes revoked, protection withdrawn, tribute increased beyond survival margins. A minor corrective strike would follow to encourage compliance. The word encourage drew amusement ripples through the chamber. It meant orbital fire upon civilian shipyards and salt. The human envoy objected, voice steady, listing population totals, evacuations impossible within the demanded timeframe. The reply arrived as a visual, a colony transport cracked open by lances of light, atmosphere venting into nothing. The image lingered long enough for screaming to be translated, then the feed ended. Laughter returned. Mockery hardened into certainty. They spoke of precedent, of how countless young species had learned humility the same way. Humanity's weapons were catalogued as curiosities, their fleets as ceremonial toys. Even nuclear fire was reduced to a footnote. The verdict came wrapped in smiles. Earth would submit, or be displayed as example. Signals raced outward from the Council, automated couriers carrying the ultimatum across relays tuned to human receivers. In the void, escort squadrons adjusted formation with the careless grace of executioners who expected no resistance. The Council moved on to other business, arguing mineral rights and star quotas, confident the problem solved. On Earth, the message fractured through every capital, every command bunker, every ordinary living room. Silence followed its final line. No one cheered. No one screamed. Farmers kept working. Trains kept moving. Parents finished dinner. The world absorbed the threat the way it once absorbed storms, with a long breath. The Council never noticed the other traffic hidden beneath civilian chatter, the quiet synchronization of clocks, the thaw of sealed programs, the subtle alignment of assets buried in dark orbits. They mistook restraint for paralysis, patience for fear. In their history, mercy always came from above, never from the condemned. By the time the envoy was dismissed, escorted from the chamber by ceremonial guardians, the Council considered the matter closed. Earth would kneel within days. Its leaders would bargain for scraps. Its people would adapt to loss. The galaxy turned its face away, unaware that it had just taught humanity. The teaching was not in suffering alone, but in the pattern of contempt, the casual way annihilation became policy. Every archive humans possessed stirred, every old war lesson surfacing in quiet memory. They had survived worse than this, had learned that predators never stop when fed, only when broken apart. Far beyond Council sight, alarms did not yet ring, and no warrior felt fear. The galaxy slept inside its certainty. Civilizations trusted their walls, their doctrines, their ancient victories. They counted fleets the way merchants count coin, unaware that somewhere a calculus had begun, one that priced freedom in blood. The last echo of laughter still trembled in the Council vaults as Earth's signal vanished into static. No reply was expected for days. The Council returned to comfort, to certainty, to the long unbroken habit of winning. None of them noticed the silence that followed, deep and absolute, the sound. When the ultimatum reached Earth, it did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as data, stripped of drama, translated into legal language that described extinction with accounting precision. Governments received it first, then defense networks, then the public feeds. For 3 minutes, the planet listened. For 3 minutes, no voice tried to soften it. Emergency protocols unfolded without spectacle. City lights stayed on. Markets did not crash. What moved instead were doors that had not opened in decades, vaults beneath mountains, shipyards hollowed into moons, arrays sleeping in shadowed orbits. Authorization codes passed through hands that did not tremble. Every institution already knew what the message meant. Humanity had rehearsed this future in silence. In a hardened chamber far below the Capitol, the President stood at the center of a circular table of living projections. Admirals spoke in calm, clipped sentences. Loss estimates climbed into numbers no one would ever fully grasp. Enemy tonnage dwarfed visible Terran fleets. Time to first strike measured in days. Not one voice recommended surrender out of fear. They spoke only of probability. The President listened without interruption. The data painted a brutal picture, yet it was not uncertainty that filled the room. It was inevitability. Surrender offered survival for the state, and slow extinction for the species. Resistance offered catastrophe for both sides and a future that could not be predicted. The choice was not between peace and war. It was between permission and defiance. Beyond the chamber, the hidden machinery of preparation reached everywhere. Reservoirs of antimatter were brought to active temperature. Deep-range drones slipped free of civilian traffic and vanished into starless corridors. Burial fleets rose from the shadow of unregistered systems, their hulls black to absorb even thought of detection. Names that had never appeared in budgets woke fully armed. Across Earth, the civilian world absorbed the truth in fragments. Some watched feeds in silence. Some prayed. Some turned off the screen and held their families without explanation. There were no riots. No mass panic. Humanity had long ago exhausted the reflex of terror. What remained was resolve, quiet and unannounced. The Council had promised a demonstration strike. Timelines were calculated. Evacuation windows proved meaningless against light-speed fire. The President studied the projections again, then dismissed them. The question was no longer how much humanity would lose. The question was what humanity would become if it accepted the loss as law. Past wars whispered through the room without words. Every moment when humans had been told they were too small, too divided, too late. Every treaty signed under threat. Every city rebuilt after being written off as debris. The species had learned that survival was not granted by mercy, but seized from force. A final briefing ended. The admirals waited, not for guidance on how to fight, but whether they would be permitted to. The President's gaze moved across each of them, then to the world projected above the table, blue and fragile, turning as it always had. The silence stretched long enough to feel heavy. At last, the President spoke a single instruction. All dormant contingencies were lifted. No distinctions remained between reserve and readiness. Humanity shifted from warning posture to execution posture in less than a heartbeat. Across the planet and far beyond it, systems answered as one. When the room cleared, the President remained alone. Old battlefield footage played without sound along the edges of the projection field. Cities on fire. Fleets breaking apart. Survivors standing in ruin and refusing to yield. The images were not chosen for sorrow, but for memory. The ultimatum still had time left on it. The galaxy believed it had granted humanity days to decide. In truth, the decision had already been made by a species that had learned, generation by generation, that waiting for mercy only taught enemies how to take more. They would not wait again, not now, not ever again. The broadcast cut into the Galactic Council without warning, slicing through debate mid-sentence. Alien voices froze as a news signal overrode every channel, every language layer, every protected frequency. The chamber lights dimmed under forced priority code. At the center of the projection field appeared a single human figure. No banners. No military framing. No crowd behind the podium. Just the President, standing upright, hands resting at the edge of a plane surface, eyes forward. The expression carried neither fury nor fear. It carried decision. Council members reacted with delayed irritation, some rising from their thrones, others issuing commands that no longer propagated. security systems lagged under unfamiliar encryption pressure. A few laughed, assuming this intrusion itself was the desperate bluff of a cornered species. The president waited until silence became unavoidable. "You delivered an ultimatum to our world," the voice said, steady and unamplified. "You spoke of tribute, example, and compliance. You believed our hesitation meant weakness. You believed our restraint meant surrender." The words carried no dramatic weight, only record. "You are incorrect." A low wave of dismissive replies pushed through secondary channels. The president raised one hand, not for emphasis, but permission. Every alien voice vanished at once. The silence was no longer consented. It was enforced. Human fleets began moving at the exact instant the next sentence landed. "We are finished discussing survival on your terms," the president said. "We are finished requesting space at a table built on extinction. We are finished asking for permission to exist." In the outer systems of the Council's oldest protectorate, relay stations detonated simultaneously, torn open from within by shaped micro-singularity charges seeded years before. Long-range sensor webs went dark in widening ripples. The first data packets arrived late, incomplete, already obsolete. The president looked into the projection as if addressing each throne directly. "No more talk." Across 3 distant sectors, covert strike groups exited Nulldrift inside defensive perimeters that had never registered intrusion in 1,000 cycles. Their weapons fired without warning, without challenge, without visible prelude. 2 carrier corps collapsed before their crews understood the alert tones. "Let the war begin." The council chamber erupted into layered chaos. Commands flooded crippled networks. Defense doctrines stacked on outdated probability trees. Admirals invoked superiority formulas that had never failed against younger species. Fleets surged into alignment paths that no longer matched reality. The next reports reached the chamber in fragments. A fortress station erased in 70 seconds. A convoy atomized mid-jump, its exit corridor converted into lethal bloom. A planetary shield grid failing from internal overload as something unknown rewrote its energy balance faster than it could compensate. Panic arrived not as noise, but as contradiction. Every sensor feed insisted humanity's forces were too small to be everywhere at once. Yet losses appeared in every protected zone simultaneously. The model said containment. Reality answered saturation. The president did not raise their voice while civilizations began to break apart. "You built your dominion on the belief that strength only grows in one direction." The broadcast continued. "Outward. Downward. From ancient to young. You forgot that predators also evolve. You forgot that prey learns faster." A council delegate tried to speak. The projection cut to a live feed instead. A once revered fleet drifting in ruptured formation, hulls venting atmosphere in pale streams. Energy signatures still flared along impact lines no conventional weapon should have reached. The image ended with a cold statistical overlay: total loss. "All retaliatory options remain available to you," the president said. "We will not block them. We will simply be faster." Across thousands of hidden human platforms, the next firing windows opened. Relativistic strike bodies released from occlusion fields. Autonomous war intelligences executed attack trees built for enemies that refused to die politely. Entire battle doctrines the galaxy had trusted for epochs expired in minutes. Inside the council chamber, belief fractured first. Certainty followed it into vacuum. The president held the final stillness of someone who no longer needed to persuade. "This is not conquest," the voice said. "This is consequence." The signal terminated without farewell. What remained in its absence was the sound no civilization ever forgets after hearing it once, the sound of an era breaking while nothing can stop it. The coalition counterstrike began with confidence and ended with disbelief. Dozens of armadas surged from fortified corridors, their formations flawless, their doctrines perfected across millennia of asymmetric war. Target solutions predicted human collapse within hours. Instead, their first volleys vanished into empty probability, intercepted by layers of defenses no scan had resolved. Return fire did not arrive as beams or missiles. It arrived as mathematics made violent. Enemy flagships disintegrated from stress that did not exist a heartbeat earlier. Energy cores folded inward, crushed by localized gravity inversions injected along command spines. Crews never saw the weapon. They saw only impossible readings, then darkness. Across 3 fronts, experienced admirals issued orders that were obsolete before the syllables finished forming. Human forces did not contest space as territory. They treated it as a timed equation. Strike vectors overlapped through dimensions the coalition had never charted as navigable. Fleets attempting retreat found their exit vectors preoccupied by weapons that had already arrived yesterday according to relativistic drift. Escape became an error state. Coalition doctrine demanded concentration of power. Humanity answered with dispersion beyond prediction. Thousands of independent kill networks operated without centralized command, guided by intent libraries rather than orders. Destroy 1 node, 10 more adapted. The war no longer resembled battle. It resembled environmental collapse. Worlds fortified for 10,000 cycles fell in single rotations. Defense lattices tuned against every known spectrum failed when confronted with weapons that did not occupy any spectrum at all. Planetary governors issued evacuation decrees after their shields were already dead. Cities burned beneath skies that never registered attackers. Alien civilians learned fear not from invasion broadcasts, but from absence. Trade routes went silent. Beacon stars ceased responding. Automated relief fleets returned unmanned, drifting on pre-programmed loops. Entire populations realized at once that the outer dark now belonged to something that did not announce itself. Attempts at unified response shattered under incompatible command logic. Species that had ruled together for ages discovered their doctrines could not synchronize under adaptive pressure. Joint formations became clustered targets, and clustered targets vanished fastest. Unity, once their greatest advantage, became their most efficient liability. Human commanders did not celebrate victories. They counted remaining objectives. Logistic streams stitched through micro-wormholes, feeding distant fronts without delay. Damaged vessels vanished into maintenance shadows and returned before the enemy confirmed their destruction. Attrition ran in only one direction. Coalition admirals began issuing retreat permissions under code phrases that once meant regrouping. Now they meant survival lottery. Corridors meant to preserve fleets funneled them into predictive annihilation zones. The more precisely they fled, the faster they died. In the ruins of command nexuses, survivors transmitted fragmented pleas in 1,000 incompatible tongues. No central authority answered. The council that had promised protection no longer possessed fleets to command. Power had not merely shifted. It had been redefined. The war they had planned as demonstration now consumed their strongest empires first. Every system lost accelerated the next collapse by feeding human prediction engines with refined data. The galaxy's old metric of power, measured in hulls and suns, failed completely against a force that measured resolve in exponential terms. By the time the coalition realized the war was no longer winnable by numbers, their numbers no longer mattered. Humanity did not seek symmetrical victory. It sought irreversible outcome. What followed was not a battlefield. It was a countdown. The galaxy felt it in the way stars lost their guardians and silence spread inward like cold. Trade consortiums disbanded overnight. Religious empires abandoned prophecy for evacuation charts. The certainty that the ancient order would always prevail shattered into individual acts of desperate continuation. Human forces advanced without ceremonial declarations, without symbolic targets, without pause. Each strike removed capacity, not pride. Each loss stripped another civilization of the illusion that history itself was on their side. The coalition had wanted a lesson delivered. Humanity delivered one carved into stars. When the final coalition's strongholds fell, the galaxy did not cheer. It exhaled. Systems that had burned without pause for months went suddenly quiet, their skies clearing as wreckage finished drifting. The human fleets did not pursue the last fleeing remnants with spectacle. They simply closed the net, tightened it with methodical patience, and allowed no path that led back to power. Surrender transmissions arrived in floods, layered over one another in fear-choked voices. Species that once spoke in ultimatums now begged for arbitration, for pause, for time to adapt to a universe that no longer belonged to them alone. Humanity answered none of them immediately. Silence had become its leverage. The council chambers that once echoed with laughter were empty when human envoys finally arrived. No banners were raised. No victory rituals performed. A single message was delivered to every remaining authority, identical in every language and frequency. The war was ending because its purpose had been fulfilled, not because resistance had succeeded. Humanity did not demand territory. It did not claim thrones. It imposed a boundary written in unambiguous terms. No civilization would again legislate extinction as policy without answering to the same consequences. No empire would again treat younger worlds as expendable resources without inviting erasure in return. The decree required no enforcement signature. Its proof already filled the void with silent debris. Across human space, cities lit memorial grids instead of fireworks. Names scrolled without rank or distinction, soldiers and civilians woven together into one long accounting of cost. Children watched those lists with quiet attention, learning not only what had been lost, but what had been defended. There were no speeches promising endless peace. Only the assurance that the price had meaning. In the aftermath, alien historians struggled to redefine their timelines. For ages, history had flowed outward from ancient cores toward fragile edges. Now it bent around a species that had refused its assigned place. Academies revised doctrines that had survived unchallenged for millennia. The word human entered war lexicons not as classification, but as condition. Trade slowly resumed along corridors now guarded by human patrols that did not posture or threaten. They observed, recorded, and remained. Predatory raids vanished where those ships appeared. Smuggling fleets began avoiding entire sectors not because of checkpoints, but because no one knew how far human response could reach. On Earth, the President addressed the world once, briefly. There were no victory claims, no promises of dominance. Only a statement that humanity would not rule the galaxy and would not abandon it either. The future would be shared under a single restriction: no one would again be permitted to decide who deserved to exist. Long after the last hostile signal went dark, distant civilizations still adjusted course whenever their scans detected Terran signatures. Not from hatred alone, and not purely from fear. From memory. The knowledge that somewhere, a species had chosen not to be managed, not to be consumed, not to be corrected. The galaxy had learned many lessons across its long expansion: how to conquer, how to enslave, how to erase. It learned a different lesson now, one written into orbital mechanics and the caution of survivors. Humanity had not arrived as savior or tyrant. It had arrived as answer. And in the deep records that followed, scholars would eventually agree on the moment everything changed. Not when fleets first burned. Not when empires collapsed. But when a single voice, calm and unyielding, ended an age of negotiation with one irreversible sentence. That sentence traveled farther than any fleet, embedding itself into law, culture, and instinct. Even worlds untouched by fire altered their politics overnight. They strengthened defenses, restrained ambitions, and measured every future expansion against the memory of human retaliation. Power was no longer inherited by age alone. It had to be carried carefully. From that day forward, survival included the obligation to remain civilized.